Imagine a society where the wealthiest few don't just influence laws, they write them. Where they don't just benefit from policies, they create them. Where wealth doesn't merely sway state power, it directly controls it. Does this sound familiar? The scenario might bring to mind modern discussions about the influence of money in politics, corporate lobbying, or how billionaires shape the laws that affect all of us. But this isn't a new problem. Over 2,300 years ago, in his famous work Politics, the ancient philosopher Aristotle identified a similar system of government. He called it oligarchy, ruled by the wealthy few. Aristotle was one of the most influential thinkers in ancient Greece. He studied how governments rise and fall, how they maintain power, and what makes them unstable. He observed these dynamics firsthand in the city-states of Greece, where different forms of government constantly competed for power. He saw oligarchy as one of the most problematic systems, as it tends to prioritize the interests of the wealthy over the common good. According to Aristotle, oligarchies are inherently unstable, even though they can appear secure for a time. As you read through Aristotle's description of oligarchy, you might begin to notice some unsettling similarities between his ancient observations and today's world. From the concentration of wealth among a small elite to the overwhelming influence of money in politics, many of Aristotle's insights feel remarkably relevant. In fact, his ancient wisdom might help us understand some of the challenges we face today as societies around the world grapple with rising inequality and the role of wealth in governance. So in the next few minutes, we'll break down Aristotle's blueprint for oligarchy. We'll look at how this system forms, how it holds power, and why it eventually collapses. Along the way, we'll explore how these ancient patterns may still echo in the corridors of power today. Aristotle's 6 forms of government. To truly understand Aristotle's view of oligarchy, we first need to grasp how he categorized different forms of government. Aristotle was a systematic thinker. He liked to organize and classify things, whether it was plants, animals, or political systems. When it came to government, he identified 6 distinct types, divided into 2 main categories: true forms and their perverted counterparts. This division is essential because Aristotle believed that governments could either serve the common good or deviate into selfishness and corruption. First, let's look at the 3 true forms of government. In Aristotle's view, these are monarchy, aristocracy, and polity. First one, monarchy is the rule by one person, a king or queen, who governs with the people's best interests in mind. The monarch's goal, in its ideal form, is to lead with virtue, wisdom, and a commitment to the common good. The ruler's power is absolute, but it is used justly. Aristotle believed that this form of government could be effective if the ruler was virtuous. However, he also recognized that such virtuous rulers were rare, and monarchy could easily slip into tyranny. Second one, aristocracy, on the other hand, is the rule by the few. But these few are not just the rich or the noble-born. The word aristocracy comes from the Greek word aristos, meaning the best. For Aristotle, the rulers in an aristocracy should be the most virtuous, capable, and wise members of society, those who are genuinely dedicated to the public good. Unlike monarchy, where one person holds all the power, aristocracy spreads authority among a select group of leaders who are supposed to represent the highest moral and intellectual qualities of the community. Third one, polity, sometimes translated as constitutional government, is a more mixed system. It blends elements of democracy and oligarchy, but it is guided by laws that ensure a balance of power. In a polity, no single group, whether the rich or the poor, can dominate the government. The rule of law is strong, and legal protections prevent any group from abusing their power. This was Aristotle's preferred form of government because it aimed to create a stable, just society by balancing the interests of different groups. Now, for each of these true forms, Aristotle identified a corresponding perverted form. These corrupt versions share some superficial similarities with their true counterparts, but they have lost their way, having deviated from the path of virtue and the common good. Monarchy's corrupt twin is tyranny. While a monarch governs for the good of the people, a tyrant rules solely for his own benefit. Tyranny is one of the worst forms of government in Aristotle's view because it leads to oppression, fear, and instability. The tyrant's goal is to maintain personal power at any cost, often through violence and manipulation. Aristocracy's perverted form is oligarchy. This is rule by the wealthy few, not the virtuous few. While aristocracy is about choosing leaders based on their abilities and commitment to the public good, oligarchy is about wealth. In an oligarchy, power is concentrated in the hands of those who have the most money or property, and the government exists to protect and expand their wealth. Polity's corrupt counterpart is democracy, but it's important to clarify what Aristotle meant by this. Today, we think of democracy as a positive system where people have the right to participate in their government. But for Aristotle, democracy in its corrupt form was ruled by the masses without proper legal limits. In such a system, decisions are driven by the desires of the majority rather than what is best for society as a whole. This often leads to mob rule, instability, and the erosion of justice. The shift from aristocracy to oligarchy. Now let's focus on oligarchy. Aristotle observed that societies often fall into conflict between the rich and the poor. When the rich win this conflict, they set up an oligarchy, a government designed to protect their wealth and power. Aristocracy, as we've discussed, is about ruling based on merit and virtue. But oligarchy is a twisted version of this. It's not about who is best qualified to lead. It's about who has the most money. In an aristocracy, leaders are chosen based on their ability to govern well and their dedication to the public interest. But in an oligarchy, the path to power is paved with gold. Leadership positions are no longer awarded to the wisest or most virtuous individuals. Instead, they go to those who can buy influence, either directly or through their control of economic resources. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, and it often starts in subtle ways. For example, wealth might begin as just one factor among many in selecting leaders, but over time it becomes the dominant or even the sole criterion. Virtuous leaders may still be present at first, but they slowly start to prioritize their own interests over those of the community. Before long, the government exists primarily to serve the interests of the wealthy, and the broader population is left behind. Aristotle believed that this shift from aristocracy to oligarchy was dangerous because it undermines the very foundation of good governance. In an oligarchy, the welfare of the community is no longer the main focus. Instead, the government is structured to maintain and increase the wealth of the ruling elite. This, in turn, creates a deep sense of inequality and injustice, which can lead to social unrest and instability. The characteristics of oligarchies. According to Aristotle, oligarchies share certain traits with tyrannies. Both are forms of government where power is used to benefit those in control, rather than the broader community. However, there is a key difference. Tyrants rely on military force to maintain power, while oligarchs rely on wealth. Oligarchs use their financial influence to manipulate political systems, often behind the scenes. This can happen in formal ways, such as through laws that limit who can hold office based on property qualifications. It can also happen in informal ways, such as making the process of running for office so expensive that only the wealthy can afford it. These tactics ensure that power remains in the hands of the few, who use it to pass laws and create policies that benefit themselves. For example, oligarchs might pass laws that give them favorable government contracts, protect their business monopolies, or create regulations that limit competition. This financial control allows them to shape the legal and political systems to suit their needs. In this way, oligarchies can appear stable because they operate within existing legal frameworks, but they are still fundamentally unstable because they serve only a small, wealthy elite. The spectrum of oligarchies. Aristotle also noted that oligarchy is not a single, uniform system. Instead, it exists on a spectrum, with different types of oligarchies depending on how much power is concentrated in the hands of the wealthy few. On one end of the spectrum, you have extreme oligarchies, where only the very richest individuals hold power. On the other end, you have more moderate forms of oligarchy, where a small, powerful minority controls the government, but there may be some limited opportunities for others to rise into leadership positions. However, even in these more moderate forms, oligarchies remain deeply unequal. The wealthy few still hold most of the power, and they use that power to maintain their privileged position. They might allow some token participation from the middle class or less wealthy elites, but the system remains firmly in the hands of a gatekeeping inner circle. How oligarchies form. One of the most interesting aspects of Aristotle's analysis is how he explained the rise of oligarchies. He believed that oligarchies often begin with a gradual shift in power. A small group of people starts to accumulate more and more wealth, which in turn gives them more political influence. As their power grows, they shape laws and institutions in ways that further increase their wealth, creating a cycle where wealth leads to power and power leads to more wealth. This process can be subtle at first, and many people may not even realize that it is happening. A system that seems democratic or aristocratic can slowly slide into oligarchy without most people noticing. But over time, certain signs become clear. The wealthiest individuals start to control key government roles. Merit and ability become less important than wealth for gaining leadership positions, and the idea that economic inequality justifies political inequality becomes more accepted. Once an oligarchy is fully established, the people in power use several tactics to maintain their hold. One of the most important is controlling education. By making higher education expensive or exclusive, they ensure that only their children or the children of other wealthy families can afford the opportunities needed for leadership roles. This creates a cycle where the rich stay in power and the poor remain marginalized. Oligarchies also work to reinforce class distinctions. They might pass laws that make it harder for people from lower classes to build wealth or social status. Over time, this creates a rigid social hierarchy where the wealthy few hold all the power and everyone else is locked out. Signs you might be living in an oligarchy. At this point, you might be wondering, how do these ancient insights apply to the world around us? While Aristotle was studying the city-states of ancient Greece, his observations on oligarchy were remarkably astute and perhaps relevant to a few other societies throughout history. Here are some signs that might indicate the presence of oligarchic tendencies in a modern society. First, look at laws and regulations that seem to benefit the wealthy at the expense of the general populace. This isn't always obvious. It might be hidden in complex tax codes or subtle regulatory structures. For example, imagine a tax code that allows the owners of luxury yachts to claim significant deductions, while ordinary citizens have no comparable options. Next, examine economic policies. Do they tend to increase the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few? Aristotle noted that oligarchies use their power to further enrich themselves. Consider a hypothetical society where the government consistently bails out large corporations, which hits the general population with inflation, higher taxes, and reduced public services. Over time, this could lead to increased wealth concentration. Another key indicator is access to political office. In a true oligarchy, only the wealthy can realistically attain positions of power. This might not be an explicit law, but imagine a political system where running for office requires millions of dollars in personal funds or backing from wealthy donors. This effectively restricts political participation to the rich, or those supported by the rich. Related to this is the question of who has genuine access to lawmakers and regulators. In an oligarchic system, the wealthy few have the ear of those in power, while ordinary citizens struggle to make their voices heard. Imagine a scenario where industry leaders regularly hold private meetings with lawmakers to discuss policy, while requests for meetings from ordinary citizens or smaller organizations are usually ignored. Also, look for a so-called revolving door between government and the private sector. If you see a constant flow of individuals moving between positions of political power and high-level corporate roles, that might indicate the kind of close alliance between wealth and governance that Aristotle associated with oligarchy. For instance, picture a situation where a high-ranking official in the finance ministry leaves his post for a lucrative position in a major bank, or a former government minister getting hired by a corporation within his former portfolio. Social mobility is another crucial factor. Aristotle understood that oligarchies work to maintain class distinctions. Consider a society where the cost of education has skyrocketed to the point where only the children of wealthy families can attend universities without incurring crippling debt, thereby limiting opportunities for advancement for those from less affluent backgrounds. Remember, Aristotle didn't see these as isolated factors, but as symptoms of a political system that prioritizes the interests of the wealthy few over the common good. No society perfectly fits any single model of governance, and elements that might appear oligarchic could exist within various other political systems. The key is to look at the overall pattern and to consider how political and economic power are distributed and used. The fall of oligarchies. The good news, according to Aristotle, is that oligarchies are inherently unstable. The bad news is that they are often replaced by another perverted form of government. Aristotle recognized that political regimes fall for many reasons, but he saw revolt as one of the primary causes, particularly in oligarchies. One interesting observation Aristotle made was about the introduction of new cultural or ethnic groups into an existing political community. He argued that this could be a significant source of instability and conflict, especially if these groups don't quickly develop a shared sense of identity or common purpose with the existing population. Internal conflict among the oligarchs themselves is another major factor in their downfall. This could occur when a small group within the oligarchy becomes too greedy and attempts to monopolize all the offices of power. Aristotle noted that this hyper-concentration of power often leads to resentment and conflict within the ruling class, which destabilizes the entire system. Perhaps the most significant threat to oligarchies, in Aristotle's view, comes from popular revolt against state-sanctioned oppression. The constant tension between the rich and the poor creates a powder keg of social unrest, which can explode if not managed carefully. Aristotle also noted the role of populist leaders in this process. These figures often emerge during times of social unrest, promising reforms and rallying the people against the oligarchs. While this sometimes leads to the establishment of one of the three true regime types, Aristotle observed that it often results in a new oligarchy or even tyranny. Another fascinating insight from Aristotle concerns the generational aspect of oligarchic decline. He believed that the children of oligarchs, raised in luxury and comfort, tend to become degenerate and weak over time. Meanwhile, the children of the poor, hardened by their difficult circumstances, become strong and tough. This disparity, Aristotle argued, equips the poor to rebel successfully against their rulers. Conclusion. As we wrap up, Aristotle's analysis of oligarchy provides us with some timeless insights into the dynamics of wealth and power and governance. From the gradual rise of oligarchic rule to the tactics used by the wealthy few to maintain their grip on power, these ancient observations may resonate in our modern world. While every society is different, Aristotle's description of how wealth and politics intertwine remains relevant, especially as we consider the challenges of inequality, democracy, and justice today. I'd love to hear your perspective. Are there parallels you can draw to your own society? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this exploration valuable, please consider joining our channel. Leave a thumbs up and leave a mark in the comments. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong.